All right, we are in the spiritual sword. Questions and answers about life after death. And the question for this week is, will we remember life on earth? Now, last week we talked about, will we recognize one another in heaven? Right? And what was our conclusion? Yes, we probably will, right?
Yeah.
So, what are we going to recognize about each other if we don't remember life on earth?
Yeah.
All right, so it's kind of I may have rearranged the articles. I may have put this one before the other one if I was the editor, but the editor of this book is a fantastic person, a fantastic speaker, preacher, writer. I don't envy his job because I know it's hard to get these things put together. So before we get into it, what's your initial thoughts on this? Will we remember life on earth? Adrian?
I think yes.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
Just because I want to, I think we will.
Okay.
I want to think that George will remember still,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Consider the rich man and Lazarus.
Consider the rich man and Lazarus, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's one word in particular that Jesus uses there, and we're going to get into that. He says, remember.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Remember.
So I think that's important that we recognize that, he does tell the rich man to remember in this life.
Not Lazarus.
Yeah, he told the rich man that.
Yeah.
Now there was the thought last week, well, there's some things I don't want to remember, right?
Mm-hmm.
We talked a little bit about, are we going to recognize who's not in heaven when we get there? And if we remember life on earth and we remember the people we knew and we don't see them in heaven, that's probably going to cause a little bit of pain. It's probably going to cause some sadness. So there may be some different ways to look at this. And I appreciate Brother Colley's approach here, where he doesn't really give us a conclusive answer. But he gives us some of the clues that we might be able to find from the Scriptures to help us with some of those difficult thoughts. All right, so he starts off, page 20. It's often said that the Bible is as wise in its reservations as it is in its revelations. There's a lot of things we want to know, right?
Mm-hmm.
And God doesn't tell us everything. When they brought the woman who was caught in adultery before Jesus in John chapter 8, and he kneels down and he starts scribbling in the dirt with his finger, what's he writing?
No, business.
Nobody knows. It's none of our business. Yeah, I mean, and he may have been like, you ever been to a little league game and the little guys in the outfield, and as soon as the ball is thrown in, he's sitting on the ground scribbling on the dirt. And maybe that's what he was. Maybe he was just doodling. I doubt Jesus was just doodling.
Yeah.
But, we don't know. We don't know what he was doing. There's some things that we're going to have to wait until we get to heaven to find out. And by the time we get there, we might not care anymore. I don't know. But we do know certain things will be revealed to us. We'll be able to sit down with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And so I'm looking forward to kind of filling in some of the gaps, some of the curiosities. But they're not things that we need to please God. Will people in heaven and hell remember life on earth? Many who read this edition of the Spiritual Sword have witnessed an aged loved one succumb to some form of irreversible dementia. In its latter stages, patients forget almost everything. They can no longer remember the names of their husbands or wives or children. They have forgotten where they lived, where they went to school, and the fact that their parents have long ago died. That memory loss is naturally painful to hearts of loved ones. The cherished loved one is really no longer there. We look into his or her face, but the person we see is not really the person we have known. My friend David Hamilton told me about a time that he went to visit his mother recently, and his brother and his nephew went with him. And they visited. She was real, friendly the entire time, and then they left. And his mother called his sister and said, David came to see me today, and he had 2 young men with him too. One of her other sons, and she didn't realize it. And her grandson, and she didn't realize it. And those things happen in this life. And there's pain in that. And it's something that we need to understand, that there are people that are going through that, even if we're not. And we need to be as kind as we can in those situations. We need to be very careful about telling jokes about dementia, memory loss, things of that. Even though we don't mean anything harmful by it, somebody who's actually suffering through that, it can be very painful to them to hear those jokes. So we need to be careful that we watch what we say, really all the time, but around people who are suffering especially. When time is no more, Brother Colley continues, when time is no more and the earth has been burned up, I will still be me. We talked about this a little bit last week. Remember, Jesus, when he was in the womb, he was Jesus. As he walked on this earth, he was still Jesus. When he died and went to Hades, he was still Jesus. And when he was resurrected, his soul went back to his body, and he was still Jesus. And we see that's the same pattern that we find in the scriptures as we think about our lives, our existence. When we were in our mother's wombs, we were who we were. Even if we hadn't been given a name yet, we were still that person that God had created in that situation. When we were born, we've lived our lives up to this point, and we are still us. We have an identity. We have a personality. When we die and when we go to Hades, we're still going to be this same person. We'll be separated from our bodies during that time, but then at the resurrection, we'll be rejoined with our bodies, and we're still going to be that same person, that same personality. Brother Colley makes a connection with the resurrection here. The connection to our mortal bodies. And perhaps it's in God's wisdom that he reunites us with our mortal bodies to give us a clue that we are still going to retain our identity. Yes, our bodies are going to be transformed. They're going to be glorified, no longer corruptible, no longer mortal, but it's still going to be our body. He's not going to reunite my soul, or not reunite, he's not going to put my soul in someone else's body, is the point. He's still going to allow us to retain our identities and our personalities. He asks the question, why does God bother with our mortal bodies after all? Why raise them when our souls, the eternal part of us, has already separated from the physical body? I don't know, but perhaps it is to help us realize that in eternity we will still retain our distinct identity. I will be clothed with a new house, but still will be me. My corruptible body will put on incorruption, but it will still be my body. Let's turn over to 1 Corinthians 15. I didn't look to see what version he uses. Probably New King James, but I don't know for sure. And that's what we use in class. So 1 Corinthians 15, starting in verse 50. Now this I say, brethren, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does corruption inherit incorruption. Behold, I tell you a mystery, we shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, this mortal must put on immortality. So when this corruptible has put on incorruption, and this mortal has put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your sting? O Hades, where is your victory? Brother Colley says, whatever our eternal destinies, we will remember life on earth. Some things that he points out. If after I die, if I cannot remember my life on earth and I am lost, my punishment will not be reasonable to me. Now, he gives the example of young children, young parents. They learn that it's best not to have much time between misbehavior and punishment. How long did mom and dad wait until you got punished? It's usually pretty swift, right?
Yeah.
Because they want you to make a connection between what you did, the fact that it was wrong, and the fact that there are consequences to doing things that are wrong. If you wait for a long time and the kid don't remember, then the punishment is going to seem harsh and unreasonable. When you're potty training a dog, it's much the same thing. You need to catch them in the act if you're going to punish. Because if they do their business and then run off and you find it an hour later and you try to punish them, they don't know what they're being punished for, right? Well, if we can't remember the rebellion, if a lost person cannot remember disobeying God, then they're not going to see God as a just God, are they? They're not going to see him as righteous. Delayed punishment is not wise for parents, and I believe that God is far wiser as a father than I ever was, and that any of us could ever be a wise parent. But I think that's reasonable to say that the punishment should fit the crime, and if we don't remember, it's not going to. So that's one reason for thinking that we will remember life on this earth. Imagine suffering in hell and not knowing why you were there. Jesus, our judge on the day of judgment, will explain the details about his decision to deliver us to heaven or hell. We must all stand before the judgment seat of Christ and give an account for the things done in his body, whether good or bad. And in Matthew 25, I feel like I reference Matthew 25 almost every week nowadays. He separates the right and the left, the saints and the sinners, the sheep and the goats. And he says to those on the right, you've done all these marvelous things. You fed me, you clothed me, you gave me something to drink. When did we do these things? When you did it for the least of these, my brethren. Oh yeah, I remember doing that. And then he's going to turn to those on the left, and you didn't do all of these things. When? When you ignored and neglected the least of these, my brethren, right? They're going to make a connection. I did the good things. I remember doing the good things. Or I did the bad things, or I failed to do the good things, perhaps is a better way of putting that in that context. I failed to do the good things. And I remember that neglect. I remember not doing those things. When the trumpet finally blows and the great assembly is present for judgment, men and women, they're going to be judged for the things that they did during their lifetimes on earth. If we don't remember doing it, is that a righteous judgment? Just from a logical standpoint, no. Are you going to go down to the courthouse and stand up for somebody that you don't know what they committed, you have no idea the seriousness of their crimes. It may be a traffic ticket, it may be triple homicide. Are you going to stand there and take whatever punishment is coming to them? No, because you didn't do it. Judgment Day, you're going to be charged, sentenced for the things that you did or did not do. If after I die I cannot remember my life on earth, then Jesus didn't make any sense in Luke 16. When he talks about the rich man and Lazarus, we have the rich man crying in torments, crying to Father Abraham, saying, "Have mercy on me. Send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame." But Abraham said, "Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, likewise Lazarus evil things."
Well, see, he knew Lazarus, and he knew
Yeah,
he had to have known him from some other time.
right. When he recognized Lazarus. We talked about that last week too, didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
So the rich man knew who Lazarus was. He recognized him, and Abraham said, "Remember when you were on earth. Remember when you were alive." We're going to remember life on earth. Now, we'll get into it a little bit more. Will we remember everything? I don't know. We'll get there in a minute. Let's focus on this word remember first. The Greek word is the same one used in other verses, which reference people remembering while living their natural lives on earth. Matthew 26 and 75. Peter, after denying the Lord, he remembered the words of Jesus, what Jesus had said to him. "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." So he went out and wept bitterly. That's the same Greek word that Jesus uses in Luke 16. Then in John 2:22, "Therefore when he had risen from the dead, his disciples..." That's not 2:22. Maybe it's 22 too.
2:22.
Is it?
Yeah.
In John? I didn't verify these, but I'm sorry. Okay, yeah. Okay, I got you. John's kind of doing a flash forward there. "Therefore, when he had risen from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this to them, and they believed the scripture and the word which Jesus had said." So he's talking about the disciples and how they remembered what Jesus had said after his resurrection. And then later in John 11:16, talking about the death of Lazarus, his disciples did not understand these things at first. But when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things were written about him and that they had done these things to him. So time after time we have that word remember. And it's talking about intelligence. We're able to use our brains to call up memories. Okay? There's no evidence, and we've talked about this before, that the narrative of the rich man and Lazarus is a parable. But it makes little difference for our discussion, because what are parables? They're things that could have happened, right? So even if it was a parable, it still could have happened. He's still talking about reality or real possibilities. Parables, if Jesus is telling us something that could not have happened, then he's not telling a parable, he's telling a fable. He's telling fiction. And that's not what Jesus used to teach. The rich man's painful memories are doubtless part of the suffering that he endures even today in torment. He will spend an endless day regretting the decisions that he made when it really mattered. Now, in contrast to this, heaven will be even sweeter because of our memories. Because of the relationships that we have formed on this earth. You and George, you think about reuniting with those who who've gone on, who were faithful, and how much sweeter it's going to be because you're going to get to share heaven with them. And you're going to remember the big moments, the day you were baptized. I don't remember the date, but I remember being baptized. You know, I remember talking to Brother Savage and then all the things surrounding that day and leading up to that day, you know, how I was thinking about it and wondering, is it the right time? Should I do it? You know, you remember things like that. And you're going to remember other big moments, your weddings. You're going to remember the births of your children. You're going to remember all of these wonderful things that happened. And Brother Colley is a preacher. He talks about gospel meetings. He talks about potlucks. You know, we're going to enjoy those memories when we're in heaven. The Bible teaches us that we will remember life on earth when we are in heaven. And Brother Wayne Jackson talks about the rich man and Lazarus. He says, Lazarus was described as being in Abraham's bosom. This expression is a biblical idiom which suggests a state of honor. It implies that Lazarus was in a warm and respected fellowship with Abraham. Alfred Plummer notes that the language suggests that the former beggar now shares Abraham's happiness, and that this indicates consciousness. Brother Colley adds that it seems possible that the faithful dead in heaven will not remember everything of their life on earth. Peter says that heaven is undefiled. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 4, he talks about that inheritance, incorruptible and undefiled, that waits for us. That word undefiled means that there's nothing in heaven to corrupt it. There's nothing there to bring us grief. Strong's Greek lexicon says that the word undefiled means free from that by which the nature of a thing is deformed and debased, or its force and vigor impaired. Therefore, I assume that painful memories from our lives on earth will not be present. How could I carry them into heaven without the glorious experience being debased? Can you imagine someone in heaven being depressed by the memory of someone who is not there? Or of brothers and sisters who made a shipwreck of their faith and died in a lost condition, and one of the church members is looking for them. So there's the implication that maybe there are certain things we won't remember. You know, some people face unspeakable trauma during childhood. Some people suffered terrible things during adulthood. Are they going to have to carry that memory for eternity? Or will they somehow be taken away from them? Revelation 21 verse 4 talks about the removal of pain. God will what? Wipe away, right?
So that, to me, kind of indicates there will be tears, but He'll take care of it.
There may be initially.
Yeah,
but later on, we see there are no tears.
Right.
So maybe the day of judgment there will be weeping.
Right.
Maybe.
Maybe.
And then God will wipe them away. And maybe we won't remember certain things.
Yeah.
All things are possible for God, right?
Yeah.
So how He decides to do it, I don't know. That's His prerogative. But there may be an implication there that God will somehow remove those painful memories. Now, there is a suggestion by some that heaven's going to be so amazing, so wonderful, that we're not going to even be bothered with those painful memories. That they'll pale in comparison. There are others who believe that the rightness of God and His justice that we'll finally fully understand it, and the painful memories won't be painful because of his righteousness. I'm not sure. This is one of those things that we'll find out when we get there, if we remember to ask. It's just one of those things we don't absolutely know for sure. Now, one thing is for sure, though, a painful memory will, as painful memories will increase the suffering of those who are condemned, happy memories will increase the joy of heaven, which will be incorruptible, undefiled, and never ceasing. Paul talks about the joy that he's going to experience when he sees the folks from Thessalonica in heaven, from Philippi in heaven. You are our joy, he says. So there's going to be an increase of joy when we see those who are there. If after I die I cannot remember my life on earth, that will render me incapable of recognizing my loved ones in heaven. Jesus makes heaven appealing by pointing out great men of Scripture who will be there. I say to you that many will come from the east and the west, sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. That should be Matthew 8:11, if you want to make that correction in the text. Matthew 8:11. What difference will it make if I'm in the presence of these great patriarchs if I don't know who these patriarchs are? If I don't recognize him as Abraham, am I going to care that I'm sitting next to him? He's just another soul. Anonymous soul at that, if we've lost all of our memories. Because he won't remember who he is either. Jesus teaches that we will recognize people in heaven. Brother Colley says that he wants to be with his wife there. They won't be married, but he says, I cannot imagine erasing her from my mind and still being me. I want to see my grandparents, my children, my grandchildren. It's a precious comfort that we will remember life on earth and wonderful people that we have known. And then there's what Paul says in Philippians 1:23. I want to see Jesus. Since I'm hard-pressed between the two, having a desire to depart and be with Christ, which is far better, nevertheless, to remain in the flesh is much more needful to you. Paul fully expected to close his eyes on the earthly side of life and open them in glory to behold the face of his Lord. He was anticipating being with Christ. There's significance in that word, being. If he's not Paul anymore, is he even existing? I'm convinced that beyond the grave we will have memory of earthly life, because if we do not, Revelation 6:9-11 loses its primary meaning. Now, I'm in a little bit of a disagreement here with Brother Colley and Brother Jackson, because Jackson says that this is in heaven. But if God's justice has not been executed yet, those martyrs aren't in heaven yet. They're in paradise. So I'm not sure if this is metaphorical or what, but they're crying for justice. They're crying for vengeance. And obviously they remember what had happened to them. And they're requesting God to execute his vengeance.
Well, if they remember in paradise, then they would probably remember in heaven. So.
Perhaps. I don't know.
I don't know.
This is just one of those things that I'm not fully convinced one way or the other yet. Brother Colley says, I don't know how God will wipe away all tears from our eyes in heaven while still allowing us to have memories of our lives on earth. Will he systematically somewhat surgically remove the painful memories? Isaiah 65:17 is one passage that people point to sometimes. It's the last two lines here. For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former shall not be remembered or come to mind. And people say, look, that's right there. It tells you right there, we're not going to remember anything from earth.
is this.
But you look up right above it and it kind of fills out the picture a little bit. So that he who blesses himself in the earth shall bless himself in the God of truth. He who swears in the earth shall swear by the God of truth, because the former troubles are forgotten. Because they are hidden from my eyes. For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former shall not be remembered or come to mind. Is he talking about everything in the former, or is he talking about troubles? That's a question that I don't have a final answer for necessarily. Isaiah explains that it is our former troubles that will be forgotten or erased. He specifically identifies that which will be hidden. I don't know that that's the final word on it. I'm not sure that we have a final word on this one. But it's something to consider, to think about as we live our lives here on this earth for God. That last paragraph, memories of our lives on earth will be an additional joy in heaven and a further agony of the condemnation of hell. So live your life in such a way as to minimize regrets here on earth and maximize the joy of memory and glory. So are we doing that? Are we living that way? Is the question that we need to ask ourselves. And if we're not, then do what we need to do to correct ourselves and to do the right things. All right. Comments, questions?
I just think we need to focus on getting
Yeah,
there.
we got to focus on
And
getting there.
everybody in here has probably lost loved ones that were not in a safe condition. But we can't dwell on that.
Right.
We have to think about, we have to make sure that we don't end up, because even Lazarus didn't want his brothers to come there.
Yeah. There was a woman in Covington, Indiana, the mother-in-law of one of the elders. She had lost her husband, lifelong Methodist. Had a meeting with Jim Collins. He conducted a meeting there for us, and he studied with her. Many men had studied with her through the years, and she never would submit to baptism. She said, if my husband didn't see the need for it, there's no need for me to do it. Jim asked her, he said, if your husband were here right now, what would he want you to do? Knowing what you know, what would he want you to do? What would he do? She was baptized that night.
Mm.